In the next part of our journey, we're going to make sure this lab topology that we're building together is actually going to be functional for us. So to do that, we're going to power on at least one of the firewalls, do some initial configuration just to verify basic connectivity and functionality. And then once we're comfortable that that's working, we can move to the next logical piece. So let's go ahead and right-click Firewall 1, and we'll power it on by clicking on Start. Also, I just recognized that I didn't add the DMZ here, so let's add another network while this is powering on. We'll right-click, click on Network. I'll call it DMZ 172.16.1 based on our plan, and I'll change the icon to represent another cloud. And for this one, let's go ahead and use Private 3, and we'll click on Save. And then we'll connect our firewall to that network on port 3. So we'll select port 3, click Save. Also, as this firewall boots up now, I also recognize that I did not add the management interfaces. It's gonna be hard to connect to these devices and manage them if we don't have an IP address on an active interface that we can reach. So let me go ahead and add my management network. So we'll go ahead and click on Network, and I'm going to specify for the type it is my management network. And for the icon, I will go ahead and put a cloud there. I'm going to call this Management 192.168.1 because that's what it happens to be. And click on Save. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take all these firewalls and connect port number 1 on the local firewall to this management network. So I'll go ahead and I'll bring in Firewall 3 on its port 1, great, and Firewall 2 on its port 1, click on Save, and Firewall 1 and its port number 1, click on Save, and Firewall 4 also on its port 1, and click on Save. Also, if we want to make these connections for the management network look a little bit different, we could right-click on one of them, click on Edit. So if you want to change the color, you can, or if you want to change the style, for example, to a dashed line, we can. Click on Save, and then we could repeat that process for the others as well, just to help when we visually see it to recognize that that's the management interface connection. So I'm going to repeat that for the other firewalls. Right-click on the link, click on Edit, change the style to dashed, click on Save, and repeat that 2 more times. Edit, dashed, save. And for Firewall 4, right-click on the link, dashed, and save. Now the Firewall 1's had a moment to boot up. There are on this network DHCP services on the 192.168.1 network. However, I'm not sure if I put that connection in before or after I connected the firewall to that network. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this firewall. And I've currently got EVE-NG set up to use Secure CRT as its terminal. So just by clicking on the firewall, it brings up a CLI. Here's Firewall 1. And there we go. All right, it's asking us to log in. The default login is admin, and there's no password. So you just simply press enter, and then it makes you change the password. So I'm going to set that password to something I use consistently here in my lab. Press enter, and I'll confirm the password. And whatever password you want to use for your lab environment is fantastic. So next we need to identify what the heck IP address did we get, if any, on that port 1 interface. And one way of finding that out would be to use the command get system. And I'm choosing the tab key. If you have a unique few characters and you tab it out, it'll complete for you. And I'll put IN and hit tab. And when you put a few characters in and hit tab, you can continue hitting tab. It'll simply cycle through all the options. So in this case, it's showing us all the next options that start with IN. And I want interface. I'll hit space and a question mark. And then I'll type in the word physical, a question mark, and then press enter. And that's going to show me the details regarding the interfaces. So right here, if I scroll up, here it's showing us that on port 1, it is using DHCP, and it currently has an IP address of 192.168.1.35 on my management network. However, there is a huge problem in connecting to that IP address, even if it's reachable. So if I bring up my local computer right here, and if I do an IP config and press enter, it's showing me I have the IP address of .151 on that same network of 192.168.1 based on this 3-octet mask. So if we did a ping to that address, 192.168.1.35, look at that, we can reach it. So we have a couple problems though. Even though we have reachability to this IP address, we don't have the ability with an eval license to use HTTPS. And by default, HTTP is not even allowed. So let's save some frustration for ourselves. And let me walk you through how we can both set this IP address to what we want it to be and also allow HTTP, which is going to be required by the eval license. So let me move my command prompt out of the way. And to change the details for this port number 1, we're going to use the command config, followed by system, and then a question mark for context-sensitive help. And what we're after, I'm hitting the space bar to go one page down at a time. What we're after is interface. So that's right here. So we'll type in interface, hit tab, and then press enter. And now we are in interface configuration. So here, if we want to do a show, it'll show us the configuration for our interfaces. So I'll scroll up here. Here's the command. I'll do a show. And it says here for port 1 that the mode is DHCP. And as far as what's allowed, we're allowing access on that interface for ping, which is why our ping worked, HTTPS, which is good if the license supported it, SSH, and FGFM, which we'll talk about more in detail later. But by default, it's not supporting HTTP, and also by default, the eval license doesn't allow HTTPS for management. So we're going to set the mode to static. We're also going to include the allow access to include HTTP so we can manage the box from a browser. So we'll say edit, and we want to edit port 1 and press enter. So any configurations we do right now are going to be applied to port 1, which is this interface right here, which is connected to our management network. So we want to set the mode to static as opposed to DHCP. And we also want to set the IP address to 192.168.1. And this is firewall 1, so it's going to be 71 with a 24-bit mask, which in dotted decimal is 255.255.255.0. So we'll do a show. So there's the IP address that we've assigned. And next, let's fix this. Let's go ahead and do this command right here. I'm just going to copy paste it in. But I also want to allow HTTP. Let me scroll over a little bit so you can see that. And press enter. And then we'll do a show. And now we're also allowing HTTP as well. So now what we can do is we can connect to this firewall via HTTP at this IP address. So we'll go ahead and type in end, and let's open up a browser. And so if we connect to 192.168.1.71, which we are right here, it's asking us for our username. So we'll put in the username of admin, and then whatever password we specified when we connected at the CLI, we're going to use that password here. So with the username and password supplied, we'll press enter. And it's encouraging us to make a few additional decisions about that firewall. So we'll go ahead and say begin. Let's call this FW1 because it is, and click on OK. And we'll go ahead and use the optimal set for the dashboard, which is the default behavior. We'll click on OK, and we'll close that intro video. So for basic testing, if on the left here, if we go down to network and we click on interfaces, and let me scooch this over a little bit so we can see our topology. Here's showing us our port 1 address of 192.168.1.71. And as a basic test, let's also just configure port 4 with its IP address ending in .71, and that will be, let me minimize this real quick, and that will be on the 23.1.2 network. So to configure port 4, we just select port 4 here, click on edit, and then we'll specify the IP address, which is 23.1.2.71, and then you can use a dotted decimal mask, or you can use a /24, just like that. And then we'll go ahead and click on OK. So effectively, as far as the test is concerned, we have a management IP address of .71 on the 192.168.1 network, and we're connected to it via HTTP. And also, we have port 4 configured with an address of 23.1.2.71. But the challenge is we have nowhere to go. We just have this little lab sudo 23.1.2 network. And so in the next video, I'd like to walk you through the integration of the real internet and a device that can act as a NAT/PAT device to allow all of our traffic from our lab to interact with these servers on the public internet. And I'll walk you through that in the very next video. So I'll see you there in just a moment. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.